Hi, juniors. Welcome, welcome. So today we are going to take notes about our second grammar unit, and that is the semicolon. So you should have opened this document in you'll find that in Canvas, and then split your screen and have this video playing. Make sure you pause whenever you need to, and then just follow along. It should go in perfect order with the PowerPoint today, okay? All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start presenting. So before we get started with the three different uses of a semicolon, I want you to think about why this is important, right? That's a question you should always be asking. Why should I know this? How is this going to benefit me, right? So next to why knowing how to correctly use a semicolon, why is that important? How will it improve my writing? Here's just a few reasons, okay? So number one, using a semicolon helps your writing be more sophisticated. It helps your writing be more clear, more stylistic, and it gives you some swagger as a writer, okay? So go ahead and write those down so that that's your motivation. This is why I want to know how to do this. And quite frankly, guys, it's not hard, right? So let's just improve our writing. And everybody wants more flair, right? So here we go. The first use of a semicolon, I want you to write down the use, and that is that a semicolon joins two closely related independent clauses. Okay, so make sure you jot that down in semicolon use number one. So the formula of what that would look like is independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is an independent clause. That's going to be our reminder, okay? So for your important reminder in the next column, so you're like now on number 3 here, or number 4, an independent clause, if you'll remember from prior English classes, has both a subject and a predicate or a verb. Right? So think of that word independent. If something is independent, if someone is independent, they can stand on their own as a complete, right? So if a sentence is independent, it can stand on its own as a complete thought, right? So in other words, an independent clause is a complete sentence. It has a subject, a predicate, and can stand on its own. Doesn't need anything else, right? If you feel like you're up for the challenge, go ahead and write your own example of an independent clause in your notes as well. Now, what I want you to understand then is that sometimes we have these two independent clauses, two sentences in our writing. They're on the same topic, right? They're closely related. So then I can use a semicolon to combine those two sentences a little bit more stylistically. So here's your first example. So go ahead and type this one out in your notes. We should go to the library to study, semicolon. It's the only place I can fully concentrate. So again, those two independent clauses, those two complete sentences, instead of putting a period in between them, I decided I'm going to just extend one into the other, and I'm going to put a semicolon there, right? So let's take a look at another example. This one I did write for you. So Sarah went to the grocery store. That's a complete sentence. She bought apple juice and cheese. That's a complete sentence. As a writer, I look at those two closely related sentences and I think to myself, I'm going to just extend the one into the other instead of separating them with a period. So I can use a semicolon there instead of a period, okay? So in your writing now, whenever you have two sentences that are closely related, they're on the same topic, they work together, instead of separating them with a period, one of your options of many is to use a semicolon, right? The little winky face, okay? So now I want us to take a look at a couple more examples. Go ahead and write these two examples. And looking at them, what do you notice about semicolon? What do you notice about what do I have to do and remember about when I use a semicolon? So the first example, the third example, I should say, the score was tied, semicolon. The game went into overtime. What do you notice specifically about semicolon usage? Okay. Look at number 4. Professor Brown has left the laboratory. You may still be able to reach her through email. So looking at these two examples and all four examples that we've looked at so far for rule number 1, I'm hoping that you'll notice two specific things, and you can jot these down into notice that, okay? Notice that you do not capitalize after a colon. So look, the T in the is not capitalized. The Y in U is not capitalized after that colon. So that's one of the main ways that semicolons and periods differ, okay? A semicolon tells your reader, hey, I'm blending this sentence into the next one, right? These two sentences are closely related. But I also have to remember that after a semicolon, unlike a period, I do not capitalize, which you guys might like. You guys hate capitalizing, right? It's kind of annoying. I see it in your writing. You don't like to do it. So why don't we start using a little bit more semicolons? Not a lot, but sprinkle them in every once in a while. And then I also wanted you to notice, so the second bullet point is that these two sentences must be closely related in topic in order for you to appropriately use the semicolon, right? So if I have two sentences that are not related and they're kind of different, they're almost contrasting, I would suggest not using a semicolon in between them and just using your standard period, okay? All right, here is the period test. So if you can put a period there, you can put a semicolon there. If you can't use a semicolon, right? They work hand in hand. So for example, the score was tied, the game went into overtime. So the score was tied, that's a complete sentence, that's an independent clause. The game went into overtime, that's a complete sentence, it's an independent clause. Remember, to be an independent clause, it has to have a subject, a predicate, right? And it has to be a complete thought. So since both of those are complete sentences, then yes, I am allowed to use a semicolon in between them because they are closely related, okay? Let's take a look at another period test. After the final play, semicolon, the game went into overtime. Is this a good use of a semicolon? Well, after the final play, is that a complete sentence? After the final play? No, right? There's no predicate and it's not a complete thought. After the final play, that's a dependent clause, right? That's a phrase actually, and it needs more information to be complete. The game went into overtime, that is a complete sentence, but I cannot use a semicolon here to combine these two independent clauses because they're not two independent clauses, right? This is not a sentence after the final play. So in reality, if you can't use a period there, you definitely can't use a semicolon. Instead, the appropriate punctuation mark would be a comma here, okay? So that's the period test to check in your own writing. If you have two complete sentences, you can combine them with a semicolon if they're closely related, all right? So that is semicolon use number 1. If you don't understand anything, go ahead and rewind. If you missed something, go ahead and go back and pause, and then get ready for semicolon use number 2. So semicolon use number 2 is similar. The only difference is that you would use a transition word to combine the two sentences in addition to a semicolon, okay? So in your notes for semicolon use number 2, I want you to write a semicolon also links two independent clauses, two complete sentences, when the second clause begins with this special type of transition, which is the conjunctive adverb. Okay. Now the formula for this is independent clause, semicolon, lowercase transition word. Remember, we do not capitalize after a semicolon, comma, and then the second independent clause. So notice how that transition word, the conjunctive adverb, if you want to be uber fancy, right? That transition word is kind of smushed or hugged between a semicolon and a comma. And you have to use it that way. That's why I created these formulas for you so that you can figure it out, okay? So you remember these rules. So we have to have a list of some conjunctive adverbs. So you do not have to write all of these words, but I wanted you to notice how many of these are you already using on your own, right? So how many of these have you already used in your writing? Now, Write down all of those because you're familiar with them, but then also write down some that you've never used, but you should because they're swanky, because they're Gucci, because they're cool. So write down some words. Like if you've never written a sentence or that you can remember, it's not very often that you do, use otherwise or similarly or subsequently. Why don't you write those down in your notes now under common conjunctive adverbs so that you remember oh yeah, I can use that to combine two complete sentences and use a semicolon and a comma, and then I'm super, super awesome, right? So go ahead and write down some of these words so that you remember how to do that, okay? Pause me here so you can write. So again, the formula, independent clause, semicolon, do not capitalize that transition, comma, and then the second independent clause. So here are some examples. So go ahead and write these down. Example 1 and 2. The experiment was deemed successful. That's my first independent clause, my first complete sentence. Semicolon, don't capitalize that transition. Unfortunately, comma, our results were unsatisfactory. So again, semicolon, transition, comma, next independent clause. Our results were unsatisfactory. So unfortunately is one of those conjunctive adverb transitions that really works well with that semicolon. And just look at that swagger in that sentence. Like that's a high school level sentence. That is phenomenal writing, right? That's what we're hoping to achieve, right? All right, let's take a look at example number 2 of semicolon use number 2. He studied hard, semicolon, don't capitalize that transition, therefore, comma, second independent clause. He earns excellent grades, all right? So he studied hard, he earns excellent grades. Instead of writing those two simple kind of elementary level sentences, I'm going to combine them with a semicolon to add some swagger. I'm going to use that conjunctive adverb, therefore, with a comma to really make my writing more powerful. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do when you're editing your writing, editing your essay. You really want to see, okay, if I have two simple sentences like that, he studied hard, he earns excellent grades, I can beef up my writing. I can strengthen my writing by combining them in this way, right? So that's semicolon use number 2. Let's take a look at one more example. Now let's take a look at semicolon use number 3. So this one's a little different than the other two, okay? So semicolons, the rule is, so type this out, semicolons are used to separate items in a list, okay? So when we're listing items, if those things that I'm listing already have a comma. If those things that I'm listing already have a comma. Well, in the next part of your notes, in the next column, I want you to guess. How would you do that? So here are the things that I want you to list. These are places: Moscow, Idaho, Springfield, California, Alamo, Tennessee, and other places. How would you list these in a sentence? Because they already have commas in between, right? And I don't know about you, but I didn't know Moscow, Idaho existed. I didn't know there was a town called Moscow. I didn't know Springfield, California existed. So if I list all of these things in a sentence and just put commas in between them, that could look like 6 different places, when in reality it's only 3, right? Could look like Moscow, Idaho, Springfield, California, Alamo, Tennessee. In a sentence, that could look like 6 different places, and that's not correct. It's actually 3. So here's your sentence start. The conference has people who have come from. The conference has people who have come from. Go ahead and guess. How would you do that? How would you write that sentence? Listing Moscow, Idaho, Springfield, California, Alamo, Tennessee, and other places as well. How would you use the semicolon to combine that list in a sentence? Pause me here if you need more time. Otherwise, let's check your work. The correct answer is, and I want you to make sure that you have the correct answer. So you don't need to change yours if you were wrong, but definitely have the right one. So the conference has people who have come from, look, Moscow, comma, Idaho, semicolon. So that semicolon tells the reader that's one place. Springfield, comma, California, semicolon. Again, the semicolon tells the reader that's another place. Alamo, comma, Tennessee, semicolon before the and other places as well. So notice that semicolon before the and as well. Once you start using that semicolon in between places, you need to do it before that conjunction and as well. So I would maybe put that semicolon in red. Oh, that's the longest spell. I would maybe put that semicolon before the and in red so that you can see it. Okay, so it stands out to you in your notes. All right, so now let's take a look at another example of semicolon use number 3, right? Listing items in a series that already have commas. The 3 performers included Jasper, and then a description of who he is, the trained squirrel, semicolon. Belzar, comma, a tightrope walker, semicolon. And Petunia, comma, a magician. Okay, so again, without the semicolons there, it would look like I'm listing 6 people, and that's not correct. It's 3 different people with descriptions of what they do in their performance. So I use the semicolon in between to show my reader that. And as a reader, I see that there are 3 people with descriptions, right? So it's important that we know how to read that and we know how to write that, okay? All right, here's what I want you to do. In the next section of your notes, I want you to practice. So go ahead and pause me. These are your 3 sentences. I wrote them out in your notes. You put the semicolon wherever you think they are necessary, and then we'll check your work. All right, so hopefully you guys were able to put the semicolon after magical in the first sentence. So the homecoming dance was magical. That's my first independent clause. I am now in love. That's my second independent clause. Now, because I is always capitalized, if a word is capitalized, supposed to be capitalized after a semicolon, you keep that, right? So proper nouns, proper pronouns like I wouldn't lowercase it. I just keep it, okay? In sentence number 2, the New York Yankees are my favorite team. That's my complete sentence. Semicolon, transition, comma. However, I sometimes doubt whether or not their manager is competent enough for the job. So semicolon before, however, don't capitalize, however, comma after, okay? And then last but not least, this is our listing rule, rule number 3. We went to Springfield, Illinois, semicolon, Ann Arbor, Michigan, semicolon, and New York, New York, okay? So using the semicolon in between each of the places, so Springfield, Illinois is one place, semicolon, Ann Arbor, Michigan is another, and then the semicolon before the and. All right, guys. This is your opportunity to ask some questions in the last column of the notes. I'm really looking forward to practicing this with you. And remember, we are taking a quiz on Friday, so study up, okay? Move on to practice 1. Bye, guys. Have a great day.